Welcome to Story Tales. Please give this video a like and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The leather chair groaned as Colton Ramsey leaned back, loosening his silk tie after another productive day at Reynolds and Burke Marketing. The Chicago skyline spread out in front of him, the buildings glowing amber in the setting sun through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His corner office on the 38th floor reflected 15 years of unyielding commitment, the same dedication he'd put into his marriage. His phone buzzed. Another message from Lainey. "Working late. Don't wait up. Love you." The same words she'd been sending for weeks now, the same excuse that had started to feel as empty as their goodbye kisses. Colton stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over it, recalling when "love you" once meant something genuine. "Everything okay, Mr. Ramsey?" He looked up to see Monica, his assistant of 8 years, standing in the doorway. Her coat was draped over her arm, reading glasses hanging from their chain around her neck. She wore the familiar expression she'd perfected over the years, one that let him know she could see right through his forced smile. "I'm fine, Monica," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Have a good evening." "You too, sir," she replied, hesitating for a moment before adding, "Mr. Ramsey, whatever it is, you'll figure it out. You always do." After she left, Colton pulled up his calendar. The nagging unease in his stomach demanded attention. He started counting. Lainey had worked late 12 times in the past month. The pattern was undeniable, just like the way she kept her phone guarded, the secret lunch meetings, and how she'd stopped wearing the diamond necklace he gave her for their 10th anniversary. The drive home seemed to take longer than usual, his thoughts circling like vultures. Traffic moved slowly along Lakeshore Drive, giving him too much time to reflect on all the small changes. Lainey had been going to the gym more, buying new clothes, spending more time on her looks, changes that once seemed innocent but now formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. 10 years of marriage, a decade spent building a life together with trust and commitment. He had given her everything. The lakefront house, the interior design business she'd always dreamed of, unwavering support through all the highs and lows. Or so he thought. When he arrived in their driveway, Lainey's white Mercedes was already there. He checked his watch, 7:30 p.m. So much for working late. The house was quiet when he stepped inside, but he could hear the shower running upstairs. The entrance hall still held the photos from happier times, wedding days, anniversaries, vacations. Colton stopped in front of a picture from their trip to Greece last year. Lainey's smile had seemed so genuine then, her arms around his waist as they posed in front of the Santorini sunset. Had she been faithful then, or had the lies already begun? Lainey's purse sat on the kitchen counter next to her phone. She'd always been cautious with that phone, never leaving it unattended, but now, as if fate had decided to reveal its hand, the screen lit up with a notification. Colton's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. In 10 years of marriage, he'd never checked her messages before. Trust had always been the foundation of their relationship, or so he believed. The doubt had been gnawing at him for weeks, and it finally broke his resolve. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again, baby. Last night was amazing. Same time next week." The sender's name made his blood run cold. Jackson Hale. Colton knew him. Everyone in their social circle knew Jackson Hale, the arrogant real estate mogul who believed his wealth made him untouchable. The same Jackson who was married to Delaney, who had attended their dinner parties, who had shaken Colton's hand while sleeping with his wife. A memory flashed back, sharp as broken glass. Last month's charity dinner at the Drake Hotel. Jackson had been there with Delaney, Lainey wearing that new red dress she had bought specifically for the event. Colton had noticed them talking, but hadn't thought much of it. Now he remembered the subtle touches, the lingering glances, the way Lainey laughed at whatever Jackson said. The shower stopped upstairs. With careful precision, Colton placed the phone back exactly as he'd found it and moved to the living room. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey from the crystal decanter, a wedding gift from Lainey's parents. His hands were steady now, but inside, something had shattered. Lainey came downstairs, wrapped in her silk robe with wet hair clinging to her neck. She jumped slightly when she saw him. "Oh, you're home early." Colton took a slow sip of his whiskey, studying her over the rim of his glass. The woman before him, his beautiful wife of 10 years, looked the same as always, but now she seemed different. Every movement, every expression felt calculated, false. "Am I?" His voice remained casual, controlled, Thought you were working late. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous tick. The meeting finished earlier than expected. Must have been an important client. Just the usual end-of-quarter reports. She moved to the kitchen, keeping her back to him as she poured herself a glass of wine. The same wine Jackson had sent after their last dinner party. "How was your day?" she asked. "Enlightening," he replied. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said, finishing his whiskey and standing. "I'm going to take a shower." He climbed the stairs slowly, each step measured and deliberate. Their bedroom still smelled of her perfume. Chanel number 5. His Christmas gift to her last year. How many times had she worn it for Jackson? The bathroom mirror reflected his face as he loosened his tie. He looked the same as he had that morning, but everything had changed. The man who had left for work believing in his marriage was gone. In his place stood someone colder, someone who would make them pay for every lie, every betrayal, every mocking moment. Later that night, lying beside her, Colton listened to Lainey's steady breathing. She had fallen asleep easily, peacefully in her deception. He stayed awake, plans forming in his mind. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation. No, they deserved something far more elaborate, something that would not only destroy their affair, but shatter their entire world. His phone buzzed softly. It was an email, an invitation to the Thompson Charity Gala next week. Colton smiled in the dark. Sometimes the universe had a sense of irony. As Lainey shifted in her sleep, turning away from him, Colton made his decision. The gala would be perfect. Everyone who mattered in Chicago would be there, watching as he exposed every dirty secret, every lie, every betrayal. But first, he needed an ally, someone who had as much to lose as he did, someone who would understand his need for revenge. He needed to talk to Delaney Hale. Over the next week, Colton became a hunter, stalking his prey. Every morning, he arrived at his office earlier than usual, using the quiet hours to gather evidence. His laptop became a record of betrayal, storing every lie, every secret meeting, every piece of evidence that would eventually bring their world to ruin. "Cancel my lunch meetings this week, Monica," he instructed his assistant. "I've got personal matters to handle." The personal matters involved careful surveillance. On the first day, he followed Lainey's Mercedes to the downtown business district. She parked near the Rivera Hotel, a discreet but expensive spot. 20 minutes later, Jackson's black Range Rover pulled into the same garage. Colton, sitting in his car, took photos with a telephoto lens he'd bought specifically for this purpose. 2 hours later, they emerged separately, but their flushed faces and Lainey's slightly tousled hair told the whole story. The next day, he hired a private investigator, not to gather evidence, but to dig into Jackson Hale's background. The report arrived quickly, detailing a man whose success had been built on cutting corners and stepping on others. Jackson had started in real estate during the 2008 financial crash, buying up foreclosed properties from desperate families. He had turned those tragedies into wealth, expanding into commercial real estate, now owning several high-rises in downtown Chicago. His projects were rumored to be rife with bribes and regulatory violations. "Mr. Ramsey," the investigator's voice crackled over the phone. "There's more. Mr. Hale has a pattern. This isn't his first affair." Colton's grip tightened on his phone. "Tell me everything." 3 years ago, Jackson had an affair with his project manager's wife. When it came to light, the manager was quietly transferred to the Detroit office. Last year, there was another incident involving a client's wife. Soon after, the client's business faced multiple code violations before moving their contracts elsewhere. "So, he's a predator," Colton said softly. "A careful one," the investigator replied. "He targets married women, especially from his social circle, makes them feel special, desired. Then when things fall apart, he has enough dirt to keep them quiet." But Jackson had made a mistake this time. He had targeted the wrong man's wife. Colton spent his lunch hours parked outside their usual meeting spots, the River North Bistro, where they shared intimate lunches in a private booth, and a boutique hotel in the Gold Coast, where they disappeared for hours. He photographed everything: times, dates, locations. The evidence grew. Credit card statements showed matching charges at hotels and restaurants. Security footage from his office building caught them in the parking garage, stealing kisses like teenagers. Each piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged, building a solid case of betrayal. One afternoon, he saw them at a sidewalk cafe. Lainey laughed, her head thrown back, her hand resting on Jackson's arm. The intimacy of the gesture made Colton's stomach turn. He snapped several photos, adding them to his collection. That evening, Lainey came home, humming, a shopping bag from an expensive boutique swinging from her arm. "You're in a good mood," Colton remarked, watching her over his laptop. "Had a great meeting with a potential client," she replied, kissing his cheek. He forced himself not to recoil. More lies, he thought to himself. He had seen her spend 3 hours with Jackson at that cafe. No client in sight. "That's wonderful, honey. Who's the client?" She hesitated for just a second. "Oh, a new tech startup. Very promising." The lies flowed easily now. Colton wondered if she even felt guilty anymore. Later that night, he reviewed his evidence. Photos, timestamps, credit card statements, hotel receipts. Everything was carefully organized, but it wasn't enough. Public humiliation required perfect timing, perfect execution. He needed someone with insider knowledge of Jackson's world, someone who understood the stakes. He needed Delaney Hale. Finding her private number wasn't difficult. As the wife of a prominent real estate developer, she sat on multiple charity boards. A few calls to business contacts and carefully worded requests gave him her direct line. Colton stared at the number on his screen, while in the kitchen he could hear Lainey preparing dinner. Most likely texting Jackson between chopping vegetables, Colton thought, his mind now set. He pressed dial. The phone rang 3 times before a refined voice answered. "This is Delaney Hale. Mrs. Hale, this is Colton Ramsey. We need to talk." Colton could hear the surprise in her voice. "About what?" "It's about our spouses. Can we meet somewhere private?" There was a long pause. He could almost hear her mind weighing the options. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm and deliberate. "The Four Seasons. 2 hours. I'll have a private room set up." Perfect. The pieces were falling into place. The Four Seasons private dining room radiated old-world luxury, its cream-colored walls and crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over mahogany furnishings. Delaney Hale sat at a corner table, perfect posture in a black Chanel blazer that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her expression was as solid as marble, but her fingers tapped gently on the white tablecloth, the only sign of tension. "This better be important," she said as Colton took his seat. "I don't appreciate cryptic calls," she added. Colton placed a manila envelope on the table between them. "Your husband is having an affair with my wife." Delaney's hand froze mid-air, her eyes narrowing as she searched his face for any sign of deceit. "Excuse me?" Her voice was low and sharp. "I have proof," Colton replied, opening the envelope and methodically laying out the evidence. Photographs, text messages, hotel receipts. They've been meeting for months, usually during late meetings or business lunches. Delaney studied each piece of evidence with the precision of a jeweler examining diamonds. The first photo showed Jackson and Lainey entering the Rivera Hotel. The second captured them at their favorite bistro, heads close together. The third showed Jackson kissing Lainey in his car. Delaney's lips thinned into a hard line. "That son of a—" she muttered, her composure cracking for just a moment before she straightened. "How long have you known?" "A week. I've been gathering evidence." Colton leaned back, observing her response. "I assume this isn't the first time." Delaney let out a dry laugh, though it held no humor. "Oh, Jackson has a type. Married women, preferably from our social circle. He makes them feel special, desired." She took a measured sip of water. "I've known about the others, turned a blind eye for the sake of our reputation. But this—" she gestured at the photos. "This is different. Because it's personal. And it's an opportunity." She met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "You didn't invite me here just to show me evidence. You have a plan." Colton smiled coldly. "The Thompson Charity Gala is next week. Everyone who matters in Chicago will be there, including our unfaithful spouses. Instead of confronting them now, giving them a chance to spin their lies, we'll make them watch as their world burns." He pulled out the gala invitation. "We attend together. Let them see us. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. Then, when the time is right, we expose everything." Delaney studied him carefully. "You want to destroy them publicly?" "I want them to feel what we feel," Colton replied, his voice hard. The uncertainty, the fear, the knowledge that their entire world could come crashing down at any moment. He paused. But I need someone who understands their world, someone who knows how to hit them where it hurts the most. Delaney's voice softened. Their reputations. Exactly, Colton said. Their social standing, everything they've built their lives around. A cold smile flickered on her lips. Mr. Ramsey, I believe this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. The next hour was spent planning every detail. Delaney would arrive in Colton's car, making their entrance impossible to ignore. They would coordinate their movements throughout the night, always visible, always together. Jackson hates losing control, Delaney explained, her voice rich with years of observation. He'll start making mistakes, especially if he thinks I might know about the affair. And Lainey can't stand being ignored. Seeing us together will drive her mad, Colton added. But she won't be able to say anything without exposing herself. The beauty of it, Delaney mused, is that they'll have to watch and wonder. Is it real? Do we know? Are we really together? Or is it just for show? She raised her wine glass. It's rather poetic, don't you think? Making them feel the same uncertainty they made us feel. Speaking of uncertainty, Colton pulled out another envelope. This one was thicker than the first. I had these drawn up yesterday, he said. Delaney opened it, her eyebrows rising as she read. Divorce papers. Well prepared, I see, she said. I believe in being thorough, Colton replied. As do I. She reached into her designer handbag, pulling out her own envelope. Already had my lawyers draft them. I was just waiting for the right moment. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, taking back control from those who had betrayed them. To new beginnings, Delaney said, raising her glass. And spectacular endings, Colton added, clinking his glass with hers. They spent another hour refining their plan. Every detail had to be perfect. Their arrival time, their behavior, the gradual escalation that would drive Lainey and Jackson mad. One last thing, Delaney said, as they prepared to leave. No backing out. Once we start this, we see it through to the end. Trust me, Colton said, his voice steel-wrapped in silk. Backing out is the last thing on my mind. The week before, the gala stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Colton moved through his days with calculated precision, each moment bringing him closer to the night of reckoning. At home, he maintained his facade of ignorance, watching Lainey's preparations with cold amusement. She bought a new dress for the event, a sleek black number that cost more than most people's rent. Probably purchased with the credit card he'd given her for their 10th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on him. What do you think? Lainey asked, modeling the dress in their bedroom mirror. Not too much. It's perfect. And it was. Perfect for her public humiliation. You'll be the center of attention, Colton added. She beamed at his response, completely missing the dark promise in his words. You're sweet. Oh, and don't forget to pick up your new tux from the tailor. Already done. He didn't mention that he had chosen a different tux, one that would complement Delaney's dress perfectly. Throughout the week, Colton and Delaney coordinated via secure emails, leaving nothing to chance. They met twice more, each time in different locations to avoid suspicion. The Four Seasons had been replaced by discreet coffee shops in neighborhoods where neither Lainey nor Jackson would think to look. Jackson's getting nervous, Delaney reported during their last meeting, stirring her espresso with precision. I've been getting calls in private, asking questions about my schedule. Good, Colton said, checking his phone. Lainey had texted, claiming she was at a supplier meeting, but Colton's tracking app showed her at the Rivera Hotel. Let him squirm. I had my lawyers add something special to the divorce papers, Delaney said with a razor-sharp smile. A clause about moral turpitude. That'll cost him control of 3 of his biggest properties. Thorough, Colton commented. I learned from the best. Delaney leaned forward. What about your preparations? Colton pulled out his phone, showing her the latest addition to their plan. Hiring someone to record everything at the gala from multiple angles, professional quality. When this hits social media, there won't be a single society event in Chicago. They'll be welcome at again. 2 days before the gala, Lainey grew clingy, almost desperate for Colton's attention. It was as though she sensed something coming, an instinct warning her of the approaching storm. She suggested they have dinner together at home, like they used to. I miss spending time with you, she said, chopping vegetables in the kitchen. We both have been so busy lately. Colton watched her hands move, remembering all the times they'd cooked together in happier days. Yes, we have been busy, haven't we? All those late meetings, client dinners. She faltered for a moment, the knife pausing above the cutting board. Well, that's business, isn't it? But this is us time. He smiled, knowing it would be one of their last meals together. Of course, us time. The night before the gala, Colton reviewed everything one last time. The divorce papers were waiting in his safe, every page meticulously prepared to strip Lainey of everything she'd gained through their marriage. The evidence was organized, photos, messages, hotel receipts, ready to be displayed on the gala's massive screens. His phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. Everything ready for tomorrow? All set. No turning back now. Good. They won't know what hit them. Colton stood by the bedroom window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. Behind him, Lainey slept peacefully, unaware that this would be their last night as husband and wife. Tomorrow, her comfortable world would shatter like fine crystal dropped on marble floors. He thought about their marriage vows, the promises of faithfulness and honor she had made, looking into his eyes, her voice steady, her smile bright. All lies. Tomorrow she'd learn the price of betrayal. His phone buzzed one last time. Delaney again. Sweet dreams. Tomorrow we take back everything they stole from us. Colton smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow Chicago's elite would witness a scandal they would never forget. Tomorrow Lainey and Jackson would learn that their clever little affair had been the biggest mistake of their lives. But tonight was for savoring the anticipation, for knowing that in less than 24 hours, justice would be served. Cold, calculated, and without mercy, the Thompson Charity Gala transformed the crystal ballroom of the Drake Hotel into a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. Chandeliers cast golden light over Chicago's elite as they paraded in their finest, the air thick with expensive perfume and whispered gossip. Colton watched through the tinted windows of his Mercedes as the valet helped Delaney out of the car. She was stunning in a deep blue designer gown that whispered money and power, diamonds gleaming at her throat and ears. Their entrance had been timed perfectly, fashionably late enough to ensure all eyes would be on them. Ready? Colton asked, offering his arm. Delaney's red lips curved into a predatory smile. Born ready. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Through the grand doors, they could already see Lainey and Jackson inside. They were standing near the bar, champagne flutes in hand, looking perfectly at ease in their betrayal. Lainey wore the new black dress, while Jackson sported a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's. Cars, Delaney whispered, her grip tightening on Colton's arm. Let them come to us. The more we ignore them, the quicker they'll crack. They made their entrance with calculated elegance, and the effect was immediate. Conversation stuttered to a halt, heads turned and whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Is that Colton Ramsey with Delaney Hale? But aren't they? Someone gasped. Oh my God, look at Lainey's face. Colton noticed the exact moment Lainey saw them. Color drained from her face, and her champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. Beside her, Jackson's confident smirk faltered, his knuckles whitening around his glass. Mr. Ramsey, Mrs. Hale. Richard Thompson, their host, approached with an outstretched hand. What an unexpected pleasure to see you together. Colton smiled warmly, shaking Richard's hand. Delaney and I have been working together on some exciting new ventures. Very exciting, Delaney added, her voice carrying just far enough to reach Lainey and Jackson. Colton has been instrumental in helping me explore new opportunities. The innuendo wasn't lost on anyone, least of all their spouses. From the corner of his eye, Colton saw Lainey set her glass down with trembling hands. Darling, Delaney said, touching Colton's arm in an intimate, deliberate gesture. Shall we get some champagne? They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting greetings and making small talk while steadfastly ignoring their spouses. Every touch, every laugh, every whispered conversation was choreographed for maximum impact. They're watching us, Delaney murmured behind her champagne glass. Jackson looks like he's about to burst a blood vessel. Good, Colton said, placing his hand on the small of her back and leading her toward the dance floor. Let's give them something else to watch. The orchestra was playing a slow waltz. Colton pulled Delaney close, their bodies moving together with practiced ease. They had rehearsed this, knowing every eye in the room would be on them. Your wife is about to have a meltdown, Delaney observed, her lips curling in amusement. She's changed color 3 times in the last minute. Jackson's not doing much better. Look at how he's grinding his teeth. They continued their dance, every movement designed to torture their watching spouses. Colton's hand traced patterns on Delaney's back. She laughed at something he whispered in her ear. To anyone watching, they looked like 2 people in the throes of a new romance. Finally, Lainey cracked. She moved toward them with determined steps, her face a mask of forced politeness. "Colton," she said, her voice tight and controlled. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" He turned to her slowly, as if just noticing her presence. "Lainey, you look tense. Is everything all right?" She glanced at Delaney, then back at him. "Just for a minute." Colton pretended to consider it, his hands still resting possessively on Delaney's waist. "Actually, I promised Delaney the next dance. Perhaps later. This is important. More important than my date?" Colton raised an eyebrow. "That would be rather rude of me, wouldn't it?" Lainey's composure slipped for just a moment, raw panic flashing across her face. "What are you doing?" she hissed, dropping all pretense. "Dancing," Colton replied simply, "with a beautiful woman. Is there something wrong with that?" The orchestra shifted to another slow dance. Lainey stood there, her composure crumbling by the second. Around them, other guests pretended not to watch while hanging on every word. "Colton, please!" Lainey's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "What's going on between you and Delaney?" Colton turned to Delaney with a soft smile. "What do you think, darling?" "Should we tell her?" Delaney traced a finger down his lapel. "I think some things are better left to the imagination. Don't you?" "You're right, as always," Colton agreed, turning back to Lainey. "I'm sure you understand. After all, you're quite good at keeping secrets yourself, aren't you?" The color drained from Lainey's face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing specific." Colton's voice was casual, but his eyes were cold. "Just that everyone has their little secrets, don't they, sweetheart?" Before Lainey could respond, Jackson appeared at her side. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by barely contained rage. "Enough games, Ramsey," he snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Jackson," Delaney's voice dripped with false sweetness. "How nice of you to join us. We were just discussing secrets. You must have some fascinating insights on that topic." Jackson started to speak, but Delaney cut him off. "No, really, darling. Tell us all about it. About all those late meetings, those business dinners, those special clients." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "You always did have such interesting stories." More guests gathered nearby, drawn by the mounting tension. Whispers buzzed through the crowd like static electricity. "This isn't the place," Jackson growled, his fists clenching. "No?" Colton raised an eyebrow. "I thought you loved an audience, Jackson. You certainly seemed to enjoy showing off at the Drake Hotel last month. Though I suppose you thought no one was watching then." Jackson's face went from red to white in an instant. Colton's smile never wavered. "I'm just making conversation. Unless there's something specific you'd like to discuss." Lainey grabbed Colton's arm. "Stop it! Whatever you think you know." "Think?" Colton looked down at her hand until she released him. "Oh, I don't think, Lainey. I know every detail, every meeting, every lie. You're making a scene," she hissed. "Am I? I thought I was just enjoying the party with my date." He turned to Delaney. "Another dance? I'd love to." She stepped closer to him, making sure Jackson got a good view of her hand sliding up Colton's chest. "Although," she added, "I was thinking we might want to get some air on the terrace later. It's such a lovely night for stargazing." Jackson's jaw clenched so tightly they could hear his teeth grinding. "Delaney, we're leaving now," he snarled. She laughed, the sound like crystal breaking. "Oh, darling, you stopped having any say in what I do the moment you decided to screw my friend's wife." The words hit like a thunderclap. Nearby conversation stopped dead. Someone gasped. Lainey swayed on her feet, grabbing a passing waiter's tray for support. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jackson snarled, but his voice shook with panic. "No?" Delaney's smile widened. "The Rivera Hotel, the River North Bistro, that charming little spot in the Gold Coast. Should I continue? I have dates, times, receipts." "You're drunk," Jackson tried. but the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. Hardly, Delaney replied, turning to Colton. Darling, wasn't it the 14th when they spent 3 hours in that private booth at Mayon Lauren? Or was it the 15th? The 14th, Colton confirmed, his voice cold and precise. The same day Lainey told me she was working late on the Peterson account. Funny coincidence. Lainey made a small, broken sound. Colton, I can explain. Can you? He turned to her, and for the first time, let her see the full force of his rage. Can you explain why you broke every vow we made? Why you looked me in the eye and lied day after day? Why you let this piece of... Don't talk about him like that! The words burst from Lainey before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Lainey clapped a hand over her mouth, realizing too late what she'd revealed. Well, Colton's voice was deadly quiet. At least now we know where your loyalties lie. Jackson stepped forward, trying to salvage some control of the situation. You think you're so clever, don't you, Ramsey? Playing these games, making these accusations. Games? Colton laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about games, Jackson? Like the game where you screw other men's wives? Or the one where you pretend to be a respectable businessman while destroying families? Watch your mouth, Jackson warned, his face darkening. Or what? Colton stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You'll try to ruin me, like you did to Richard Martinez when your affair with his wife came out? Or Thomas Blake when you couldn't keep your hands off his wife? Jackson lunged forward, grabbing Colton's lapel. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations, but Colton didn't flinch. He just smiled, cold, calculated. Go ahead, he said softly. Show everyone exactly who you are. Jackson's grip on Colton's lapel tightened, his knuckles white with rage. The crowd around them drew back, forming a circle of shocked faces and whispered commentary. You think you can come in here, Ramsey, spread your lies, try to ruin my reputation? Your reputation? Colton's laugh was cold enough to freeze blood. The only person who ruined your reputation is you. I'm just making sure everyone knows exactly who Jackson Hale really is. You don't know anything about me, Jackson spat. I know everything. Colton didn't move to break free. His calm only infuriated Jackson further. Every dirty deal, every affair, every time you've destroyed lives for your own pleasure. Tell me, does it make you feel powerful? Taking other men's wives? Ruining families? Jackson, stop! Lainey's voice cracked with panic. Please, you're making it worse. Shut up! Jackson snapped at her, and in that moment of distraction, Colton moved with lightning speed. He grabbed Jackson's wrist and twisted it, forcing the larger man to release his grip. Jackson stumbled back, his face contorting with rage. Don't you ever? Colton's voice was lethal. Tell my wife to shut up. Your wife? Jackson sneered, recovering his balance. The same wife who's been warming my bed for months? The one who begs for me, who can't get enough? Colton's fist connected with Jackson's jaw before he could finish the sentence. The crack of impact echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Jackson reeled backward, blood trickling from his split lip. For a moment, complete silence fell over the room. Then Jackson touched his bleeding mouth, looked at his red-stained fingers, and lunged at Colton with a roar of rage. His wild swing caught Colton's shoulder, but Colton had been ready. He stepped into the punch, using Jackson's momentum against him to drive his fist into the man's ribs. The sound of cracking bone was viscerally satisfying. Colton, stop! Lainey screamed, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Jackson tried to grapple, but his technique was sloppy, full of fury and no finesse. Colton slipped under his guard and delivered a brutal uppercut that snapped Jackson's head back. Security! Someone shouted. Somebody call security! But no one moved to intervene. The crowd watched, horrified and fascinated, as Chicago's elite real estate mogul was systematically demolished by the man he had betrayed. Jackson swung again, desperation making him clumsy. Colton blocked the punch and countered with a devastating blow to his solar plexus. As Jackson doubled over, gasping for air, Colton grabbed his hair and drove his knee into the man's face. Blood sprayed across the marble floor. Jackson went down hard, his nose clearly broken. Get up, Colton commanded, his voice eerily calm. Show everyone how tough you are, Jackson. Show them what a big man you are. Jackson tried to rise, blood streaming down his face, but Colton's foot caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling again. What's wrong? Colton circled him like a predator. Not so confident without your lies to hide behind? You're insane! Jackson choked out, spitting blood. No, Colton's voice was low. I'm just giving you exactly what you deserve. Our 3631. Alone. I'm just better than you at everything, including this. Colton punctuated his words with another punch, leaving Jackson curled on the floor moaning. Colton, please! Laney grabbed his arm. You'll kill him. He shook her off with enough force to make her stumble. Don't touch me. Listen to your wife, Ramsey, Jackson managed through bloody teeth. The taunt was a mistake. Colton's next punch knocked out 2 of Jackson's teeth. Finally, hotel security burst through the crowd. 2 burly men in black suits moved to restrain Colton, but he stepped back on his own, straightening his jacket with precise movements. No need, gentlemen, he said, his voice calm. I believe Mr. Hale and I have finished our discussion. Delaney, who had been watching with cold satisfaction, stepped forward. Actually, darling, I believe we have one more item on tonight's agenda. She nodded toward the ballroom's massive screens, normally used for charity auction displays. Colton smiled, reaching for his phone. You're right, of course. He pressed a button, and the screens flickered to life. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's time for a toast. The ballroom screens came alive with images, each more damning than the last. Jackson and Laney entering hotels, secret meetings caught on security cameras, screenshots of text messages, hotel receipts, every piece of evidence meticulously documented, displayed in high definition for Chicago's elite to see. Colton grabbed a fresh champagne flute from a passing waiter. His composure was perfect, despite the violence moments before. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in his tuxedo. The same couldn't be said for Jackson, still bleeding on the marble floor. Ladies and gentlemen, Colton's voice rang out through the stunned silence. I'd like to propose a toast. Colton, don't! Laney's makeup was streaked with tears, her perfect facade finally cracking. Please, we can talk about this privately. Privately? Colton turned to her, his eyes cold. Like how you and Jackson kept your affair private, how you snuck around behind our backs, thinking you were clever and discreet. The screen shifted to show more evidence, intimate text messages, hotel booking confirmations, security footage, and timestamps. You see, Colton addressed the crowd. My wife and our dear friend Jackson have been quite busy these past few months. While I was working to build our life together, while Delaney was playing the devoted wife, these two were meeting in hotel rooms across Chicago. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd, several guests pulling out their phones to record everything. Colton, Laney sobbed. I can explain. Explain. His laugh was sharp as broken glass. Explain how you broke every vow we made, how you looked me in the eye and lied day after day. No, Laney, you don't get to explain. He nodded to Delaney, who produced an envelope from her clutch. In fact, she said, her voice carrying clearly, I don't think either of you will be doing much explaining anymore. She walked to where Jackson was struggling to sit up, security guards hovering uncertainly nearby. With deliberate movements, Delaney opened the envelope and let the papers flutter down around Jackson. Divorce papers, darling, she announced, plus evidence of your multiple affairs, fraudulent business dealings, and tax evasion. I'm sure the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission will find this fascinating reading. You can't, Jackson sputtered through his bloody mouth. I already have, Delaney smiled coldly. You taught me well. Remember, always keep leverage on everyone. I learned from the best. Colton pulled out his own envelope, thick with legal documents. And Laney, these are for you. He tossed the papers at her feet. She stared at them, her face ashen. No, she whispered. Yes, Colton raised his glass. So let's toast to my dear wife and our friend Jackson, to their secrets and lies, to their arrogance and thinking they'd never be caught, to karma. Delaney raised her own glass with elegant precision. To karma. Laney crumpled to the floor, sobbing openly. Jackson tried to stand but couldn't, his injuries and humiliation leaving him broken on the marble. You've ruined everything, Laney choked out. No, sweetheart. Colton's voice was icy. You did that all on your own. I just made sure everyone knows exactly who you are. He turned to address the shocked crowd. And speaking of everyone knowing, the evidence you've seen tonight has already been sent to every major news outlet in Chicago. I'm sure tomorrow's headlines will be fascinating reading. You bastard! Jackson growled from the floor. That's rich coming from you? Colton smiled, but it never reached his eyes. How's your face feeling, by the way? I hope I didn't damage anything permanently. Though I suppose your modeling career was never going to take off anyway. Delaney stepped over her husband's prone form as if he were nothing more than a minor obstacle. I think it's time we made our exit, darling. The air in here has become rather stale. Couldn't agree more. Colton offered her his arm. Then, one last thing. He walked to where Laney knelt among the scattered divorce papers. Crouching down, he spoke softly, but his words carried in the silent room. Remember how you said you could explain? He waited until she looked up at him, mascara streaking her cheeks. Don't bother. There's nothing you could say that would make me forgive you. Nothing that would make this okay. You're dead to me, Laney. From this moment on, you don't exist. Standing, he straightened his cuffs and returned to Delaney. Together they walked toward the exit, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. Behind them, they left destruction. Laney sobbing on the floor, Jackson bleeding and humiliated. Their reputations, their social standing, their carefully constructed lies. All of it shattered beyond repair. And Colton? He felt nothing but satisfaction. Justice had been served, cold, merciless, and exactly as planned. The morning sun painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold, but the headlines painted it in scandal. Colton sat in his new penthouse apartment, sipping coffee and reading the Chicago Tribune's front page. Real estate moguls affair exposed, shocking gala confrontation. Rocks, Chicago elite. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Texts, calls, emails. Everyone wanted his side of the story. He ignored them all, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of victory. Then a knock at his door broke the silence. Through the security camera, he saw Laney standing in the hallway, looking nothing like the polished society wife she had once been. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her designer clothes wrinkled as if she had slept in them. Go away, Laney, he called through the intercom. Please, her voice cracked. Just 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. You had 10 years, he said coldly. You wasted them. I love you, she pleaded. He cut off the intercom. Through the camera, he watched her slide down the wall, sobbing. Let her cry, Colton thought. Her tears meant nothing to him now. His phone buzzed again. Delaney this time. Have you seen the news? She asked when he picked up. Hard to miss. He took another sip of coffee. How's Jackson handling his newfound fame? Poorly, Delaney laughed, rich with satisfaction. The SEC launched an investigation this morning. Turns out our evidence of his creative accounting practices caught their attention. 3 of his biggest projects are now under scrutiny. What a shame indeed. And that's not all. 2 more wives have come forward with similar stories. Looks like Jackson's predatory pattern is finally catching up to him. Colton smiled. How's the divorce proceeding? My lawyers are circling like sharks, Delaney said. With the morality clause in our prenup and evidence of his affairs, I'll take him for everything he's worth. She paused. Speaking of which, have you heard from Laney? She's currently crying outside my door, Colton replied. How pathetic. Delaney's voice dripped with contempt. What are you going to do? Nothing. She doesn't exist anymore, remember? Another knock at his door interrupted them. This time, it was his building security team. Mr. Ramsey, the head of security said, standing with 2 officers. Your wife is causing a scene in the hallway. Would you like us to remove her? Ex-wife, Colton corrected coldly. And yes, please, remove her. Through the camera, he watched them approach Laney. Mrs. Ramsey, you need to leave, the security guard said firmly. No, please. Laney struggled to her feet. Colton, just let me explain, please. Ma'am, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You don't understand, she sobbed. He's not my husband anymore, Colton said through the intercom. The divorce papers were served last night, remember? Now get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing. The next week unfolded like a slow-motion car crash for Laney and Jackson. Colton watched it all from a comfortable distance. Each new development confirmed that his revenge had exceeded even his expectations. His phone rang. Monica, his assistant. she said. Mr. Ramsey, Lainey's on line 3 again. That's her 7th call today. Keep blocking her, Colton replied, watching the storm roll in over Lake Michigan. Any other news? Yes, sir. The Chicago Business Journal wants your comment on Jackson Hale's company's stock dropping 60% since Monday. Colton smiled. Tell them no comment, though you might mention that karma is a fascinating thing. One more thing. Monica hesitated. Mr. Reynolds wants to see you about making you managing partner. Really? Colton raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. He paused. And I quote, anyone who can orchestrate that level of strategic takedown belongs in our leadership. A knock on his office door interrupted them. Richard Thompson stood there, looking uncomfortable in his $1,000 suit. Colton, do you have a minute? Of course, Richard. Come in. Colton gestured to a chair. Richard sat down. It's about Jackson. Well, he's trying to salvage what's left of his business, Richard began. He asked me to talk to you. Did he? Colton's voice turned icy. And why would I be interested in anything Jackson has to say? Look, what he did was wrong, unforgivable even, Richard said. But his company employs hundreds of people, innocent people who might lose everything, like how he made other people lose everything. Colton leaned forward. Tell me, Richard, did he send you to plead for Thomas Blake when Jackson ruined his business? Or for Richard Martinez when he destroyed his marriage and career? That was different. No, it wasn't. Jackson made his choices. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Colton's smile was sharp. And speaking of consequences, I heard the SEC is very interested in some of your joint ventures with him. I suggest you get your lawyers ready. Richard paled. Are you threatening me? Not at all. Just offering friendly advice between colleagues. Colton stood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with my divorce attorney. The law offices of Jensen and Partners occupy the top floor of a Michigan Avenue high-rise. Patricia Jensen, Chicago's most feared divorce attorney, greeted Colton with the smile of a shark sensing blood. The papers are ready, she said, pulling out a thick file. Your wife, ex-wife, won't know what hit her. Has she hired representation? She tried to, but after that gala video went viral, most top firms won't touch her. Patricia smiled wickedly. Afraid of antagonizing your connections. Widened. She's working with some strip mall lawyer from Naperville. Perfect. Colton reviewed the documents. What about the house? You'll keep it. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, and with proof of her infidelity, she violates the morality clause. She gets nothing except what she brought into the marriage. Good. He signed where indicated. Make sure she's served at her office. Maximum embarrassment. His phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. Turn on Channel 5 News now. He grabbed the remote from Patricia's desk, switching on the wall-mounted TV. Jackson's bruised face filled the screen, standing outside his office building while reporters shouted questions. Mr. Hale, is it true the SEC is investigating your company? What about the allegations of systemic fraud? Have more women come forward about your affairs? Jackson looked nothing like the confident mogul he had once been. His designer suit hung loosely, and his face still showed traces of Colton's beating. I have no comment at this time, he stammered. My attorney will... Mr. Hale, another reporter pushed forward. Sources say your biggest investors are pulling out. Is your company facing bankruptcy? The fear that flashed across Jackson's face was enough to answer. Colton watched with satisfaction as the man who thought himself untouchable crumbled on live television. His phone buzzed again. Delaney texted, Beautiful, isn't it? Watching them fall apart. Very, Colton replied. How are the divorce proceedings going? Wonderfully, Delaney replied. My lawyers found offshore accounts he thought he'd hidden. I'm taking everything. Colton was about to reply when Patricia interrupted. There's something else you should see. She handed him her tablet, showing a social media post from Lainey. I know I made terrible mistakes. I betrayed the best man I've ever known. Colton, if you're reading this, please, I'm begging for a chance to explain, to make things right. I'll do anything. Pathetic, Colton muttered, handing the tablet back. Make sure that post gets included in the divorce filing. Already done. Patricia gathered the papers. You know, in 20 years of handling divorces, I've never seen a more thorough destruction of someone's life. It's almost beautiful. Almost, Colton said, standing and straightening his tie. It's a masterpiece. A month after the gala, Chicago's social landscape had shifted dramatically. Colton sat in his new corner office at Reynolds and Burke, now managing partner, reading the latest headlines on his tablet. Hale Properties files for bankruptcy. SEC investigation. Expands. More charges expected. Society scandal leads to mass exodus of investors. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Ramsey, Laney's mother is here to see you. Colton sighed. Send her in. Eleanor Williams entered, looking every bit the society matron in her Chanel suit and pearls, but her usual imperious expression had been replaced by desperation. Colton, please. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit. You have to stop this. Stop what, Eleanor? The consequences of your daughter's actions. She's destroyed Colton. Her business is failing. No one will work with her. She had to move back home because she can't afford an apartment. She cries herself to sleep every night. How tragic. His voice could have frozen hell. Tell me, did she cry herself to sleep while she was with Jackson Hale? Or did she sleep just fine after lying to my face? She made a terrible mistake, Eleanor said. No, Colton cut her off. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What she did was a choice. Multiple choices made day after day, for months. But you loved her once, and she killed that love. He stood, towering over her. Now, unless you want your family's financial dealings scrutinized as closely as Jackson's, I suggest you leave now. After she left, his phone rang. It was Delaney. You'll never believe who just tried to approach me at the spa, she said without preamble. Jackson's mother? Colton laughed. Let me guess. Begging for mercy, claiming he's having a breakdown. Apparently, he's been drinking heavily, rambling about revenge. She thinks he might do something desperate. Let him try. Colton's voice hardened. I'd love an excuse for round two. That won't be necessary, Delaney said. The FBI just raided his offices. Seems all that evidence we gathered led them to a massive fraud scheme. He'll be lucky to stay out of prison. Later that afternoon, Colton's lawyer called with updates on the divorce proceedings. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Laney will be left with nothing. No alimony, no property, not even her wedding rings. Just then, his office door burst open. Jackson stumbled in, drunk and disheveled, his once immaculate appearance now a wreck. You bastard, he slurred, swaying on his feet. You've ruined everything. Colton didn't even stand. Security will be here in 30 seconds. Make them count. My company, my reputation, everything I built. You did that yourself. Colton's voice was ice. Every time you chose another man's wife, every time you destroyed someone else's life for your own pleasure, I just made sure everyone saw you for what you really are. I'll kill you! Jackson lunged forward, but security caught him before he made it 2 steps. Get him out of here, Colton ordered. And make sure he's charged with trespassing and threatening bodily harm. As they dragged Jackson away, his threats echoing down the hallway, Colton's phone buzzed with a text. It was a video link from one of his contacts. It showed Laney being served the final divorce papers in front of her failing design studio. The footage showed her crumpling to the ground, sobbing as curious onlookers filmed with their phones. More social media fodder, more public humiliation. Perfect. That evening, he met Delaney for drinks at the Peninsula's rooftop bar. She looked triumphant, radiating the satisfaction of a predator after a successful hunt. The divorce is final, she announced, raising her martini. I got everything. The houses, the cars, even his precious art collection. His lawyers folded like cheap suits once I threatened to expose more of his affairs. Congratulations. Colton clinked his glass against hers. To freedom. To justice, she smiled. You know, I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. They made their choices. Speaking of choices, she said, downing her glass. I'm moving to New York, taking over the East Coast operations of his company. Well, my company now. Good for you, Colton replied. You could come with me. She touched his hand. We work well together. Colton withdrew his hand gently. We worked well for revenge, but that's done now. She nodded, unsurprised. No regrets? None. He looked out over the city lights. They thought they could play their little games, keep their secrets. They never saw the storm coming. And now they've lost everything. Everything! He agreed, just like they deserve. 3 months after the gala, Chicago's winter had settled in, coating the city in pristine white that matched the coldness in Colton's heart. He stood in his new penthouse, watching snowflakes dance past the floor-to-ceiling windows while reading the latest news on his tablet. Jackson Hale indicted on federal fraud charges. Former real estate mogul faces 20 years. Scandal continues. Hale Properties assets seized. His phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. "Have you seen the news? They're leading him out in handcuffs. It's beautiful." Attached was a video clip of Jackson, once the epitome of power and privilege, being escorted from his home by FBI agents. His designer suit had been replaced by wrinkled business casual, his confident swagger reduced to a defeated shuffle. "That couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," Colton replied. "Thought you'd appreciate that. By the way, heard anything from Lainey recently?" "Not since the divorce was finalized. Last I heard, she's working as a junior designer at some suburban firm. Quite a fall from her own Chicago studio. Karma. Speaking of which," Delaney added, "settling in well in New York. The view from Jackson's former office is spectacular." Colton smiled, remembering how thoroughly Delaney had stripped her ex-husband of everything. She had taken control of his company, his properties, even his club memberships. The man who thought himself untouchable was now facing prison with nothing left to his name. A notification popped up on his tablet, an email from his lawyer. The house had sold well above asking price, the last physical tie to his life with Lainey gone. He donated all her remaining belongings to charity, erasing every trace of her from his life. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Ramsey, there's a delivery for you. Send it up." Minutes later, he signed for a package. Inside was a letter from Lainey, handwritten on expensive stationery, her last attempt to contact him. "Colton, I know nothing I say can fix what I destroyed. The life we had, the trust I broke. It's all gone, and I have no one to blame but myself. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that losing you, watching you walk away that night at the gala, was the moment I truly understood what I'd thrown away. You were everything to me, and I ruined it all for nothing. Jackson was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake that cost me the only man I'll ever truly love. I'm leaving Chicago. There's nothing left for me here but memories and regret. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry, even though I know sorry will never be enough. Always, Lainey." Colton read the letter twice, then dropped it into his crystal whiskey tumbler. Pulling out his lighter, he watched the paper catch fire, curling and blackening until nothing remained but ashes floating in the amber liquid. Walking to his wine cellar, one of the features that had sold him on the penthouse, he selected a bottle of Malin 25, the same scotch he'd been saving for his and Lainey's anniversary. It seemed fitting to drink it now, marking a different kind of milestone. The liquid caught the light as he poured it, golden as the wedding ring he'd sold the day after the gala. He moved to the window, looking out over his city. Chicago spread before him, its lights twinkling through the falling snow like stars. Everything had worked out perfectly. Jackson was facing prison, his empire destroyed, his reputation in tatters. Lainey had lost her business, her social standing, her entire world. Their punishment had been complete, absolute, and exactly what they deserved. Colton raised his glass to his reflection in the window. In the darkened glass, he saw not just himself, but the man he had become. Stronger, colder, completely free of the weakness of forgiveness. "To karma," he said softly. "To justice. To the perfect revenge." He sipped the scotch, savoring its rich complexity. Like revenge, it had taken time to mature, but the way it had made it all the sweeter. His phone buzzed one final time. News alert. Jackson's bail had been denied. He would await trial in federal custody. His lawyer's arguments about flight risk were deemed valid, given his dwindling resources and multiple offshore accounts. Colton smiled, remembering Jackson's face that night at the gala, bleeding and broken on the marble floor. The physical beating had been satisfying, but this complete destruction of everything the man had built was infinitely better. Taking another sip, he watched the snow fall, content in the knowledge that he'd orchestrated the perfect revenge. No forgiveness, no mercy, just pure cold justice, served exactly as he planned. "Now that," he said to the empty room, "is a toast worth remembering.